Hi, I want to tell you about the very first time that I ever hypnotized anybody. This was at a public lecture about hypnosis, indirect hypnosis, that I was giving in the 1970s. And I must have been quite naive because I'd never actually hypnotized anybody, but I knew enough about indirect hypnosis to give a talk about it. So I was invited along, and luckily I managed to have a brief conversation with some woman just before I gave my talk. And I remember she sat right at the back of the room, and I gave my lecture. Well, at the end of the lecture, the person who organised the talk said to me, "Well, can we see a demonstration?" And I thought, oh dear, what am I going to do? I've never actually hypnotised anybody in my life before, and now I'm being asked to do it in front of an audience of about 100 people. Well, I didn't know what to do. I mean, I knew enough about the indirect approach, how to induce hypnosis indirectly with one person. But how do you find that person out of a group of 100 people? I just looked around the room and I didn't know quite what to do. And I thought, well, this may not be very indirect, but maybe I can do what stage hypnotists do and do a hand clasp test. This is where you get them to put their hands together and you tell them they're stuck together. Well, this was a tipping point, a turning point in my life, because I gave this particular hypnotic induction with a hand clasp test. And obviously I wasn't very good at direct hypnosis, because with one exception, everyone could pull their hands apart. And of course the one person who couldn't was the wonderful lady I'd spoken to briefly before the talk, who sat at the back. And thank goodness she couldn't pull her hands apart, because if she had have done, I wouldn't be here now, and I wouldn't have had this wonderful career in hypnosis. I probably would have given up immediately. So I brought her up the front, and I did some hypnosis work with her. I induced hypnosis indirectly, because that's my particular speciality. It's something I'd read a lot about from Milton Erickson, and I'd work out some ideas of my own. And she sat there, and I thought, well, let's go for it. It's my first ever hypnotic client, and I wonder what we can do. I naively thought, well, hypnosis, you can do anything with hypnosis, and if Erickson can do it, I can do it too. So I looked at her and I thought, well, let's do something wonderfully exciting that will impress people, and let's do it indirectly so nobody quite understands how it's happening. So she was in a good depth of trance, and I looked across at her friend. Now her friend who had accompanied her was sitting there, and I kind of looked across at her, and I nodded and I implied to her that I wanted her to leave the room. So I said to the subject, as she sat in the chair, I said, unfortunately your friend has had to leave early, and she just wants you to know that she will call you later, but she's having to leave early, but she'll be back in contact with you. So unfortunately, when you come out of hypnosis, she won't be here. And so I nodded to the friend to go over to the door and to open the door, and the friend got up, went over, opened the door, and then closed it again and came back and sat down, which is what I'd suggested to her indirectly with my head nods and non-verbal communication. That's what I wanted her to do. Well, a little bit later, I brought the subject out of trance, and there was a wine glass sitting on the table there. It may have even been the glass I used for drinking water when I was lecturing. And I said to the subject, I said, "Tell me, have you ever seen a glass levitate, float in the air?" And she said, "No, never." I said, "That's right, you probably haven't. I want you to watch something very interesting." So I pulled back my chair and I said, "You look at that glass, just watch that glass now. And I want you to really think that it's going to levitate." And she sat there and she looked at the glass, and then I nodded to the friend to come up, to pick it up. And the friend came over, and the friend put out a hand, and the hand was invisible. The subject could not see the hand, could not see her friend, because the indirect suggestion was previously that the friend had gone home. So the friend lifted the glass, and the moment she lifted the glass, this woman stepped back like this. She sat back, completely surprised and almost shocked, and she went very, very white, because this glass just a few inches away from her face was levitating in front of her face. And then it came down again, and it went up again, and then came down again. And I thought, wow, I love this. This is my career. This is my future. I'm going to do this as a job from now on. And this is how I got into hypnosis, really, seriously into hypnosis. And then, of course, the friend went and sat down. And, well, later, in fact, I think it was a week later, I was giving another talk. And this talk was my next door neighbour, a woman called Janet, who lived next door to me at that time. And her brother was there. So I hypnotised Janet, and I thought I'll do the same thing. So I said, you know, in trance, your brother's had to go home, and da-da-da-da, etc., etc. And she came out of hypnosis, and I said, have you ever seen a bottle levitate? Because there was a bottle there. And of course, no, she'd never seen a bottle levitate. So I got her brother to come over and pick up the bottle, and the bottle floated in the air, and Janet just looked at it and backed away again. Same response, same physiological response, looked terrified, white. And then the bottle went down. And I thought, well, I can take this one step further. So I said to Janet, of course, you know, bottles don't normally levitate by themselves. How do you think this happens? She said, I don't know. I said, well, I have an invisible friend who helps me. Would you like to meet my invisible friend? And she looked very nervous. And I said, okay, put out your hand. So Janet put out her hand, to, you know, like this, to shake hands. And I got her brother to come up and shake her hand. Well, the moment he shook her hand, her eyes rolled back in her head, and she passed out. She went straight on the floor with a thump. She was a big lady. Straight on the floor with a thump. She just passed out. She was out cold. That was it. The shock of shaking this invisible hand. Well, this is very dramatic, okay, and it's not something I encourage you to do. I was rather naive back then in the 70s, and I was trying everything, just experimenting with all kinds of hypnotic phenomena. But can you imagine how I felt? That convinced me. If you can do something as dramatic and something as outrageous and incredible as this, just think of what you can do to help someone. I later actually helped Janet lose weight. And that's another story, because she became my first actual patient, because I took her on after that, a week or so after that, and I helped her with weight control. So that's how I got into hypnosis, you know, in terms of actually practicing and my first experiences with actually hypnotizing people. My earlier interest as a school kid, you know, I used to go to lectures at the university in Cambridge. I used to walk in as like a 9-year-old. I shouldn't have actually been there, of course, but I guess they thought I was the son of the professor or something. I used to sit and watch these lectures, and one of them was about hypnosis. That's how I got hooked initially, but then I kind of put it to one side. And then I learnt about the indirect approach from a book I got from the library, which was published in the 60s, where Erickson was one of the authors. And his words just jumped off the page at me. And that's how I got interested in the indirect approach. So that's a nice little story about my first ever hypnotic subject, my first case, if you like. And there'll be more to come, so I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for listening.